In July 28, Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Svetlana Cheparenko. It's been a year since a horrible terroristic act committed by the Russians against the captive Azov servicemen, which happened in Olenivka. At least 43 Ukrainian defenders were killed and at least 130 more were injured. Before I proceed to introduction of our guest, I want to draw your attention to the screen. There is the QR code to the petition, which was created by the families of those killed and injured in this terroristic act. The petition is to establish the day of commemoration of the defenders who were executed in Olenivka detention facility. If you proceed through this QR code, please sign the petition because it's really important. So before again I introduce our guests, I would like to urge you to commemorate everybody who were killed with a minute of silence.
Дякую всім.
Thanks everybody. So joining us today are Natalka Zarytska, chair of the Women of Steel, wife of the released from captivity soldier of Azov regiment, Nataliya Pashniuk-Pashneva, the mother of the defender of Azovstal who died as a result of terroristic attack, Maria Alekseevich, the wife of the wounded defender of Azovstal injured as a result of the attack on Olenivka, Nelya Shastun, the mother of two soldiers of the Azovstal regiment. The elder died and the second one was captured after leaving Azovstal and kept in Olenivka barracks during the terrorist attack. It's Alekseandr Zarutskyi, it's Nikita Shastun who is joining us today, and Alekseandr Zarutskyi, international lawyer. So, Miss Natalia, it's been a year since that horrible crime. What is the situation with investigation? What does the international community and the government do for that, along with the civil organizations? What is the situation with the collection of evidences? Good morning. My name is Natalya Zarytska. I'm a wife of a serviceman of Azov regiment who was released from captivity, and on the night from 28th to 29th July, my husband was detained in the Olenivka colony, and that was exactly the night the Russians committed the terroristic act aimed at cynical killing of Azovstal defenders. The servicemen of Azov regiment who were detained back then for more than 2 months. What I have found out what I have experienced after I found out about that horrible terroristic attack, I cannot tell you, even because I want to devote more time to the matter of liability for the crime committed. You know, after the end of the World War II and until the moment of beginning of the war of Russia against Ukraine, the global architecture of security was clear and understandable, and in my opinion it had a system of weights and balances. But in 2014 this system demonstrated its incapability due to the silent consent of those who are supposed to bring to liability for infringement of agreements that were set forth in the Statute of the United Nations, which came into effect on the 24th of October 1945. Just like the widow of Overton, the scale of crimes committed by Russians was growing due to their impunity. Annexation of Crimea, occupation of a part of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, kidnapping, Ilovaisk Bowl, downing of Malaysian Bowen. The scale was growing with threatening progression. But the criminals were getting away with it, and eventually we ended up in a full-scale war with Bucha, Irpin, Kharkiv, Bakhmut, Mariupol, and Kherson, and many more spots of the Russian crimes. And one of the crimes against humanity committed by Russians in particularly cynical manner still remains, and most likely will remain unpunished, is the killing of powerless prisoners of war in barrack number 200. It's known that only 125 days after the tragedy, on the 22nd of August, the United Nations created a team to investigate this crime. The General Secretary stated that he was going to send a representative to investigate the facts of the crime committed in Olenivka, but the representative of the United Nations stated that the mission cannot start its work because the situation remained dangerous for the representatives of the United Nations. How do you like it? As representative of the United Nations, Stefan Dujarric stated the mission was disbanded due to the absence of conditions in which the team could work. In fact, 4 months after its creation, and Russians now continue to plant the new reality in which murderers and terrorists will continue committing the same or even worse atrocities, like detonation of Kakhovka Dam, or even the beginning of the World War III with the use of nuclear weapons without any punishment. And it's worth mentioning that the inactivity of global organizations only encourages the criminals in their craze. This is why investigation and bringing to liability for crimes such as terroristic act in Olenivka is one of the indicators whether the world will remain the same as it was before the beginning of the war of Russia against Ukraine. Thank you very much, Ms. Natalka. Behind those terrible figures, 53 dead and more than 130 injured, there are the real stories of the people, of their families, of their wives and mothers. So I propose to hear these stories if our guests are willing to share them, and I would like to ask Mr. Alexander, who was staying there on that night, to share his story, what he'd seen, what was going on there. Good morning, everybody. My name is Nikita Shastun, call sign Matras. I was defending Mariupol starting from 24th of February 2022 until the 17th of May. To fulfill the order to preserve life by the highest command, I walked out of Azovstal to give up the arms and to turn myself in as a prisoner of war. I was kept in the colony number 120 in Olenivka, and in September I was transported to Taganrog. After 2 months upon staying in Olenivka, we were brought a list of with the names of the servicemen who were about to be transported to a different facility. We didn't know why, but we were hoping it would be an exchange. However, our expectations never came true. We were moved to the metal processing facility. There were 200 bunks, very densely placed, and the passages between them were very narrow. Then there was a barbed wire put around the facility, and then there was a trench dug. We realized that we were there for a reason, and Russians were thinking about something bad, and this is what happened after spending one night in a safe manner. On the second night, the explosions have begun, and it turned out so that I was lying with my head facing inside the building because the projector was beaming in my eyes, and thus I saved my life and health. About 23:40, there were a couple of explosions heard around, and then there was a shockwave hitting the facility, and it was a miracle I survived. I don't know how, but I was just concussed, and I got away with the minor burns and a shrapnel in my legs. There was a medic nearby, but his hands were damaged with shrapnel too, and he was unable to provide any medical help. The medics from Mariupol arrived to us only in 1 hour after the explosion. It was total hell, one night of hell. The wounded guys were thrown into the KAMAZ trucks, and the loading was over only at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was clear not all of them will make it to the hospital alive. Then we were transported to a different facility. There was a room 6 meters with 63 persons inside. There were rats and cockroaches in there. It was incredibly hot, and there was not enough water, catastrophically not enough. And we were allowed to take shower only twice. First time after the explosion to wash the dirt from ourselves, and then in 15 to 20 days, and then we were brought to the barracks with our brothers and ours. We were happy about it because we were seeing some known faces. Then in the end of September, I was transported to Taganrog, where I was kept until the 34th of December, where I was kept until the exchange. So I urge everybody who hears my words, the guys who were heroically defending their homeland, their people, should be liberated the soonest possible, because no one will ever believe in justice and unity, about which we continue hearing on a daily basis. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nikita. Thank you for your deed, for your bravery, for your courage. I would like to give the floor to your mother. Unfortunately, you've lost a brother. Miss Nelya, you've lost a son, but another son of yours is by your side right here. Good morning, my name is Nelya Shastun. Unfortunately, my son Igor died on the 1st of April 2022 during defense of our native city of Mariupol. The younger son Nikita, who took up the arms to join the regiment on the 24th of February 2022, experienced the siege of Azovstal and survived during the terroristic act in Olenivka. He's free now, but fight for his health is still underway. On the 17th of May, my younger son walked out from almost destroyed Azovstal to give up the arms with honor, as it was put back then. I kept calm down, but even in my worst nightmare I couldn't imagine what would be the tortures the guys would experience in captivity. But everything has changed on the 28th of July. I woke up back then in a good mood, and I went to the meeting of the defenders of rights and freedoms of Ukrainians, and suddenly I've heard the news about the explosion in the colony. I've started getting calls from my friends with the questions, have you heard the news? And another question was, is Nikita alive? So by the time I've made it to the center, I thought my heart would jump out, and then I started making calls everywhere trying to ask what's going on, and I was getting the same answer: nothing is known yet, there are no lists yet. And then in the enemy's publics there started the list started emerging with the names of those who perished in the barracks. Those lists were not verified, but we were trying to inspect them with the only goal not to find a name of your family member in there. And then we started being visited by the relatives of those prisoners of war who found the names of members of their families in those lists. You cannot imagine how difficult it was to look them in the eye. We were meeting the representatives of United Nations and ICRC. We were going to Geneva, to their headquarters, where we were requiring from them to act at least somehow, because when you wait for the news, well, we were waiting for the news until September, until the time that there was the first exchange, and upon the words of a brother in arms of my son, I found out that my son lost some kilograms, but it was still alive. I want to urge everybody to understand that Russia is a terrorist state. They are the barbarians who kill and torture armless Ukrainian defenders, because the Ukrainians fight for freedom and the Russians fight for slavery. Thank you, Miss Nelya. Miss Natalia, the floor is yours. Good morning. I'm Nataliya Pashniuk-Pashneva. I'm a mother of Azov servicemen who died during the terroristic act in Olenivka. It happened so that during the defense of Mariupol, I was getting terrible news about the death of my son, but they were mistaken. The last time during the video of our defenders walking out of Azovstal, I've seen my son, and it was a confirmation for me that he was alive, and I got a hope that he would come back. After I've heard about the terroristic act, I didn't even admit a thought that my Yevgen could be among those who died. And even when the Russians published the lists, I still didn't want to believe it. But with time, I had to accept the terrible fact that my son has perished. But I was oppressed by lack of opportunity to say my last goodbye to him. I was knocking on all the doors to repatriate the body of my son, and only 1 week ago I was able to bury his hand, and that was the only thing that I was given. So please listen and remember, my son, who heroically was defending Ukraine against the barbarians and murderers, is entitled to justice. And as a mother, I urge everybody to stop racism, because it's about to destroy all of you. The cowardly murderers should be brought to the highest degree of liability. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Miss Natalia. So, Miss Maria, the floor is yours. My name is Maria Alekseevich, and I'm a wife of a defender who was wounded during the terroristic act. It turned so that my husband was additionally wounded during the terroristic act in Olenivka, and he is still held captive. And I'm, as a member of the organization of the community of those who were held in Olenivka, I try to urge everybody, to tell everybody that their life and health is under constant danger. They continue losing their health due to the non-treated wounds. After 86 days of defense of Mariupol and constant bombing, the defenders of Azovstal walked out of the facility in fulfillment of the order of the command. They were promised that they would be kept separately from everybody. They would be fed 3 times a day, they would be in touch with their family, and they would be exchanged within 3 to 4 months. The defenders, who impressed all of the world with their unprecedented bravery and courage, had reasons to expect that Ukraine would fight to liberate them, but instead they got long captivity in full violation of the standards of the Geneva Convention. And after 2 months of captivity, the Russians planned a barbaric killing of half of them, and upon the logic understandable only to them, they've picked about 200 of our defenders, and on the night 29th of July last year, the Russians made a mass execution of Azovstal defenders. I found out about that from the Russian publics. We married with Sergei in Mariupol remotely. I have not believed in those news about the terroristic act first, but then I've seen the bodies of the dead defenders. I didn't know how to act. I started calling all of the government authorities and International Committee of Red Cross to find out at least any new details, but I got no response. On the next day, on the 30th of July, the Russian public published the list of those who died during the terroristic act. I didn't open the list of those who died, and I've just immediately proceeded to the list of wounded, and I found Sergei's name on that list. I was not sure it was true yet, but then I found in the Russian web sources a video with Sergei. He was lying on a bunk answering the questions of Russian propagandists. He said that he's heard 2 explosions, and after the first he paid no attention to it, and after the second everything was set on fire and he was trying to make his way out of the barracks. Then another defender confirmed that information that Sergei survived the terroristic act, but for the time being I don't know what is his condition, how serious is his wound, and where is he staying. I don't know what to do. I don't know what doors to knock and whom to ask to get engaged in the situation to bring back the dearest person. The only thing I know is that every day of captivity takes away his health and his chances to return to normal life. He deserves after what he's done for his homeland, just like his brothers in arms who stay in captivity for more than a year. Thank you, Miss Maria. Thank you very much for sharing all of your stories. The world is supposed to know about those stories, about those horrific crimes committed by the Russians. Mr. Oleksandr, how can we characterize this terroristic act in Olenivka from the point of view of international law, and what are we supposed to do to make sure that the criminals are facing liability in front of the International Criminal Court? Thank you very much. I would like to say that you should remember that those deaths that you've heard about, they remain alive in the minds of those people. It's the fight that you're not seeing from outside. It's a terrible fight and it's very difficult, and there will be more and more of this situation. So please help these people. Please remember that their memories are alive. Nothing is unfortunately over for them. And how can we help here? And one track of such help may be a legal track, because acting lawfully here, we're not talking about some material compensation or something. We have to fight and win that evil created by the Russians in the world. The Russians usually characterize it with the word nothing is so unambiguous, we don't know the complete truth. So to understand it, we have to sort out the situation. The evil is done with the hands of Russians, and the Ukrainians have to deal with it, have to sort it out with their hands. So the terroristic act committed by the crimes against the non-combatants, against the prisoners of war, according to the Geneva Convention and the international humanitarian law, the prisoners of war are those who don't take part in the warfare anymore. So in case of Russians, this is nothing what was happening. Those people were supposed to be under maximum protection, and what was going on with them is supposed to be identified by Ukrainians, because Ukrainians only have access to that amount of information. Well, in fact, that information is only crumbles, only the bodies that we get from there, the evidences from those who were present there. The world still cannot articulate what has happened. Even the latest statement of Walton Turk, the Commissioner for the human rights. He said that the United Nations cannot confirm that the death of people resulted from the explosion of a HIMARS missile. So only on a national level Ukraine should fulfill the investigation. Obviously Ukraine is doing it. Upon the article that covers all of the cases, all of the circumstances, there Article 438, but we cannot say for the time being who's behind that crime, and it's the key problem, because for all of the key mechanisms available in the humanitarian right is just bringing to liability of the state or the persons directly involved. So we should find out who was behind giving this order. Until this very day we cannot identify this fact, and we have to state that Russians understand the legal system existing in the rights, which in the world, which is based on the principles of faithfulness. They understand how the world should do, and they act in a way that this doesn't happen. So it's the ugliest thing that can be, is the difference in mentality of the countries that we oriented the countries with democracy and Russia. If you're under oath, you have to testify in the court, you have to tell the truth. So this is the last line, and for the Russians there is no such last line, last limit. So the legal aspect is very important in this fight for the life and health of those who live and for those who perished. It's important for all of the world, because if it's not so unambiguous, things like this may repeat. How would the occupation of Olenivka influence the course of action when we get access to Olenivka after liberation? There's less likely to remain any evidences. Well, justice is such a thing that is frequently built on cases, and even if you don't know today what it may result in future, you still have to do everything you can today. You have to question those available. Maybe someone would tell you about somebody who could be recognized, and then after you deoccupy the territory, we may find someone else there. So it's a very long chain of unsure moves, but we don't have other options. But eventually some of them may result in some answers. For example, you see Girkin, who was involved in downing of Malaysian Boeing. Who knows what he knows about that event? He's now in Russian prison. Maybe he won't make it until the end of war, but maybe those around him, the miners who have heard something to save their lives, they may share some information. But we have to demonstrate perseverance. Here Ukraine doesn't have a lot of options. There are different international institutions like International Criminal Court where we cannot submit because the statute of limitation expired. There is the Committee of the United Nations, but it has its problems, unlike the European Court, which had a mission to identify the facts. The Committee of the United Nations doesn't have such authorities, and they cannot prove whether the state was acting in compliance with some standards vested and obligations vested in them. So there are no other mechanisms, but we still have to adhere to those available. So we may presume what could have happened, and then we may address the international organizations and explain that we have exhausted all of the mechanisms, and this is how we can proceed. Thank you very much. Let's give the floor to the colleagues. Dear journalists, do we have any questions to our guests? Good morning, Svetlana Tkachuk, Ukrinform. I have two questions, and I would like to ask them right away. The first question is about the new details that are being discovered upon the investigation of Ukrainian investigators? May they instigate United Nations to continue their investigation? And another question is regarding the international support in this area. There were news that the Lithuanian government already has urged the United Nations to continue the investigation. Are you in dialogue with other governments so they show some solidarity and support in continuing the investigation? Thank you. Can anyone answer? Thank you for the question. Well, talking about the first question, whether the Ukrainian national investigation will support the international track, we think yes. I mean the community of the families of Olenivka. First, we need to identify some facts in the national level. What was going on during the terroristic act? We should identify the witnesses, we should question them, we should bring back the prisoners of war who can tell us more new details, and obviously all of those evidences should be handed over to the international courts, like International Criminal Court. This is something Ukraine should be dealing with, and I hope that this is how it's about to happen. As to international support, yes, we've seen the news about Lithuania, if I'm not mistaken, and our our community, our organization got united not so long ago, but we visited the Office of the United Nations and the Office of ICRC in Geneva. Natalia can give you more details about that. We still need more international support. We think about different trips abroad, maybe starting from the next month with the support of the indifferent people. We may make more trips abroad. We asked Ministry of Foreign Affairs to support our journey abroad. The representatives of our community. We have submitted the formal letter, but we were responded in about a month when we were right about to go, just a couple of days before the meeting in Geneva in the United Nations, and our representatives did not have enough time to go there because it was at the expense of the families. We were physically unable to make it within those couple of days, but we will continue working. So that's probably it. I would also like to add that as our guys are liberated from captivity, there will be more and more details found out. For example, aren't you confused by the fact that in the facility number 200 there were 200 bunks put, that it was a planned act of execution? When I was watching videos in Russian publics, I've seen a person looking like my husband with his body burnt. It was a puzzle to me why some of the bodies are scattered around with their limbs torn away and others were just looking intact and burnt. And my husband, as he got out of the captivity, he told me that all the facility was soaked with oil, and such details, they give more and more tips that international investigation is still needed. Talk to Nikita. When he tells some details, my hair starts trembling, and it's the clear indicator that there should be an investigation. Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? Yuri Boy, Channel 5. Mr. Alexander, I have a question to you. There is information that the Security Service of Ukraine made a statement that they served a note of suspicion to the former director of Olenivka colony. Can this investigation of Ukraine stimulate the International Criminal Court, for example, to initiate new investigations? And to what extent in these conditions, when Ukrainian-Russian war is in active phase, is it possible to bring to liability of those guilty, I mean the Russians. Thank you for your question. I have to tell you right away that within this period of war, Ukraine is expecting for support from International Criminal Court, but we have to realize that many things depend on ours, and justice is one of such things. When you've asked about the International Criminal Court, we have to understand that it's a complementary body. It has no national jurisdiction. There are 4 types of crimes that are contemplated by the Roman statute that ICC can investigate. Yet another crime is now the crime of aggression, but the government of Russian Federation cannot be brought to liability because they are not part of the crime, but such as crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, they can be brought to liability in such types of crimes. But it may be happening when the state itself cannot do it. Either they connive to the guilty party, or otherwise they don't have access to some important things, so the condemnation cannot juxtapose the legal processes, because it's the legal proceedings. Even international level, it's still a classic court proceedings. There are defendants, there is the accusing party. When it's all in the disposal of Ukraine, we should not expect it to be done additionally by International Criminal Court. So I still think that it all should be solved on the level of Ukraine, because we have the most details possible, helping to Ukraine in collection of evidences. This is what the international community can do. I mean, some informal information that the special services may have to help find the key witnesses, but given the tragic nature of the situation, as I've mentioned, everything that is of pain to us when I hear these stories is that those people, they will continue living through that experience again and again. And for investigation, those who are out of their captivity, the investigators should continue monitoring internet, and then they should say that I remember there was such a situation. They should support the investigation. So it requires those people who've already experienced it to continue experiencing it. You know, I don't know how they can find enough strength to do this, but still, I don't want to compare this situation to Holocaust, but you know, in Washington there is such an intense museum dedicated to Holocaust, and I was impressed in the hall dedicated to the Nuremberg process. There was a big picture of the lawyer's room filled with papers, huge piles of paper, and there is a beautiful caption in there that we should identify impossible facts with credible evidences. So this is the situation that we end up in here today. We should not rely on it being done by some international organizations for us. Thank you very much. But I would like to ask, to what extent is the Ukrainian judicial system capable of bringing, for example, that director of the colony to at least some level of liability? Well, talking about the director of the colony, it's easy, you know, that it's easier because even the United Nations recognized the non-compliance with this Geneva Convention in terms of conditions of captivity. You know, there was no supply of water or food. Well, even the director of the colony can say that he was not aware of what was happening. You know, there's a lot of Russian military, LPR, DPR there. If we find out that someone is involved there, the Russians may say that if there are DPR, LPR representatives involved there. Russians may say that they have nothing to do with it. They know exactly how to turn justice into absurd. So the chances of bringing to liability of the director of colony are quite high. But the question who committed the terroristic act, who's behind it, well, no one has any versions about that so far. Well, what I also wanted to add, as Nelya mentioned, that Russians, they fight for slavery and we fight for freedom. And in our civil organization, Women of Steel, we feel the power and we're not going to stop. We're going to continue. We'll continue joining the families of those who died, who were wounded, because we are involved in this problem. We live with it every day. And today, you know, when I was reading some historic books about Schindler's List, Auschwitz, and when Nikita was telling me how about the wounded ones being loaded on the truck, that reminded me of Auschwitz. And today you have the unique opportunity behind that terrific flow of horrible facts. You have the unique opportunity to talk to the witness of this horrible tragedy, of this crime against humanity, with Nikita, with mother of dead soldiers, with the wives of the wounded soldiers, and behind their backs there are dozens, there are hundreds, there are thousands. And the government authorities with whom we communicate, we're not gonna leave them alone. I'm telling you as a woman of steel. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, do we have any more questions? Tatiana Kozak, Grati editorial. Could you please tell us what is the phase of the national investigation? Is there any number of witnesses questioned? Thank you very much. I think Nikita may tell you how he was providing evidences, if it's not secret. Good morning. Yes, the work is underway, but unfortunately we cannot disclose any details until the investigation is still underway. Thank you, thank you. Now that we do not have more questions, I urge you once again to sign the petition behind the QR code to establish the day of commemoration of the defenders killed in Olenivka colony. It would be our small contribution to make sure that the memory of our defenders remains for years, for centuries, and this terroristic act is remembered for years. I want to thank our guests for your bravery, for your courage. I hope your personal victory is about to come, just like our common victory. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform will continue its operation at 1400. We will talk about the situation in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Thank you for being with us. Glory to the heroes.